Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, April 13th, 2026. I don't know why I said it like that. Anyway, today we are breaking down the crop voted most oxalic in high school. That would be Swiss chard and water bankruptcy. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone. I hope you all had lovely weekends. Is it as warm for you all as it is here? Well, this has been like one of the warmest, if not the warmest, starts to a season that I can remember. I keep being surprised when I remember that it's April, because it's so warm outside. It feels like May, if not June. It's gonna creep back down a hair or so here coming up in the next week. But I was not ready for all of this farmer's tanning to be happening just yet. All good though, I guess. You know, we'll just have tomatoes and peppers a little bit earlier, which I can accept that. Suits me just fine. Got the rice in the ground the other day because why not? And got our sweet potatoes started as well. Excited to be starting to harvest and deliver a little bit. You know, the season's kind of rolling along, planning a tame but productive growing season. We'll see how that plan pans out. The farm doesn't always like my plans. All right. Anyway, it is Monday, where every week this year we are digging into a single less talked about crop in a series we're calling Planting and Raving. Today, the crop we're going to cover is Swiss chard, a lovely bunching green or microgreen if you want to get fancy and plant it really densely in a tray or whatever. That is both beautiful, prolific, and potentially fairly profitable depending on the situation. Now, if you don't love this crop personally, you are not alone. The oxalic acid often comes in a little more intense with Swiss chard than it does with other crops like spinach and beet greens and that sort of stuff, meaning that it has a bit more of that dry, tart flavor that, say, beet greens, spinach, etc. tend to have. However, that can be dealt with a little bit in the cooking process, which I always look forward to hearing your recipes here. So shout out your favorite Swiss chard recipe in the comments. That sensation/flavor of oxalic acid is also a little less intense when the plant is younger and the leaves are a little bit smaller. Now, like usual with these Mondays, in this first segment, we'll talk a little bit about varieties and marketing. And then in the third segment, we'll talk about all those, fun little planting details. Okay, so Swiss chard is one of those crops that you can harvest at micro stage, like you can plant microgreens at Swiss chard. It's a little harder to grow. You can also do it at baby stage and giant stage and everything in between. When and how you harvest it will depend, and this is going to surprise longtime listeners, on your market. Some chefs, for instance, might be interested in the tender baby leaves and others in the larger ones. I worked for a restaurant once who took those really, really large leaves and blanched them and then stuffed them in a sort of pseudo spring roll. Thus, that restaurant in particular wanted those giant leaves. So if you're growing for restaurants and this is a crop you're interested in, then obviously start with the chef, see what they want. They will tell you, what size they want it at and for how long and all those things. And that will also determine to some extent what varieties you grow and the spacing at which you plant the chard. The closer together, the smaller the leaves. Like the closer you put plants together, they tend to produce smaller leaves, or at least in a really fertile situation, you don't want them too close together if you want large leaves because of airflow. But we'll talk pests and diseases in the third segment. Now, for markets and CSAs, we have always done larger bunches of Swiss chard, not so jumbled that they freak people out, but certainly long stems because the stems are somewhat of like a rhubarby celery, which can be a nice addition to the mirepoix. And they're pretty, they're very attractive. Nice long stems with wide leaves are easy to bunch and either stick in, like pre-packed boxes if you're doing like a CSA or something, or pile high on the market table, misted often with clean water to prevent wilting. That's important. In terms of profitability, Swiss chard is pretty identical to things like kale, but I find it a little bit harder to sell quite as much of the Swiss chard as I do the kale. It's more of a niche green where people who love it, but it's not nearly as common of a cooking green as say like spinach, kale, collards, that sort of stuff. At least not here in Kentucky. There's probably areas where it's very popular. I figure that each plant brings in about $1 to $2 per week, and that I can get about 8 to 10 spring weeks out of that bed, and then some fall weeks in certain circumstances. But again, that's for the third segment. So that's not bad. If you're doing like 100 plants on a bed, that would be like $200 to $400 per week in a good season with a robust market. We are not growing Swiss chard this year. It's because we stopped the farmers market a couple years ago, but we would typically start it in late February and 2-inch blocks. We like a mix of the Swiss Chard varieties in those blocks, like the Bright Lights pack from Johnny's is good, with slightly more emphasis on the red varieties. So I might buy a pre-mixed Chard pack like that, but I will also buy a little bit more of the red variety to mix in because, as the adage goes, red stuff sells. So typically those ones that have more red stems in them tend to sell better than the ones that are all green or all white. That said, the yellow and white varieties tend to be a little bit more cold hardy and tastier in my experience. So yes, we sow around 2 seeds, or really that would be like 2 seed clusters that each themselves contain like multiple seeds, similar to beets. We sow 2 of those per block and then grow those out until about 2 to 3 weeks before our last chance of frost, when we will plant them in the field and cover them if it's going to get below freezing. They can take a light frost once established, but just preferably not a freeze. One thing to note about Swiss chard and beets and spinach are that they are really susceptible to damping off caused by fungal diseases in the trays. They basically just like the greens turn to mush. So airflow will be key to growing these out successfully in the greenhouse and not overwatering them. You can also directly seed them into the soil. You can just sow it with a seeder, though they are slow to grow. So that can be a little challenging when it comes to weeds. Also, the seeds like it pretty warm to germinate, like 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius, but can germinate down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That is 5 degrees Celsius. It will just take some, like a small eternity to get them to do so. So I would suggest soaking the seeds in a compost extract overnight at room temperatures before sowing, and then sow them into relatively warm soil to give you a bit of a jump on any weeds that might be present. Anyway, we will do more on Swiss chard in the third segment. For now, though, let's veer lanes briefly and talk about the wild world of water bankruptcy that we're in. Be right back.
Welcome to my kitchen garden in Mobile, Alabama, Zone 9A. We've got the winter arugula, spinach, and lettuce going on, along with some garlic. But now the blueberries are blooming, figs have set fruit. Pride and joy this year ought to be our cantaloupe patch, which we hope to save with a top dressing of buckets this evening due to expected temperatures in the 30s.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything: custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. Their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you put your best food forward. Schedule a demo at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show.
If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Colin at pocket.farm.nagano, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. The UN just released a report saying that we've entered an era of global water bankruptcy. I'm still working my way through the report myself and don't have any specific questions on it as of now. Just curious to hear your take on it. Cheers." End quote. Good question, fun topic. I'll link the report for anyone who wants to spend the rest of their day depressed, but I'll just talk about a couple of the key points and a couple key takeaways. First, I think bankruptcy is kind of the right term here, but I don't love it only because it's not automatically clear what that means. That said, I think they are just trying something different to get people's attention, because every other term that people have tried, to get people's attention about the water crisis has clearly failed. That, in bankruptcy, is kind of the right term. We don't have enough water to fulfill our water needs, essentially. The report explains it, quote, "Across regions and levels of development, water systems are under unprecedented pressure. Rivers, lakes, and wetlands are degrading, groundwater resources are being depleted beyond sustainable limits, and glaciers are retreating at accelerating rates. These trends signal not only growing stress, but in many contexts, a structural imbalance between water demand and available resources. This report refers to this condition as water bankruptcy," end quote. Basically, we ain't got the water that our society requires to function based on the infrastructure we already have established, hence bankruptcy. Layperson terms, our ambitions are a little too big for our aquifers, and we don't have enough water to sustain the system that we've set up, period. And it's not a report about preventing the water bankruptcy. It's really about where to go now that we are in a bankrupt water situation, or post-crisis, as they call it, where some of the damage is irreversible and cannot be fixed on a human timescale. Like, It's bad. And this report is huge and detailed. It covers the conflicts caused by water shortages, which have increased from around 20 in 2010 to over 400 water-related conflicts worldwide in 2024. The report describes the breathtaking amount of wetlands we've lost, rivers that have been diverted, lakes that have dried up, droughts, salinization. I mean, there is no point in listing it all. Everything that could go wrong with water is going wrong with water. But of course, the report offers a myriad of technical solutions, and in some ways, that is the bulk of the text. And a big part of that solution is just getting people to care and want to take action. It is, as a small editorialization here, baffling to me that we don't care more about water. Ask any scientist what the most important factor in life is, and they would almost all presumably say water. When we look at life on other planets, we just look for water. Full stop. That is how important water is, and yet we cherish gold like it has value, and then we pee in our water. It is hard to express how far afield we have gotten in our priorities as a state, as a country, as a world, when we don't put the most important factor in life at the front of every single policy decision that's made. You cannot live on money, but you cannot live without water. So anyway, unsurprisingly, this report got almost no media attention. As far as I can tell, it's not mentioned in a single major publication, including the New York Times. Water just ain't sexy enough, I guess. And truth be told, most people probably agree with that. They just don't care about water, even though it is the most important thing you need to survive. The populations of water-poor states continue to rise, which is just stunning to me. States like Arizona, Texas, California, Utah, etc., these are extremely dry states whose populations are growing faster than almost anywhere. What are we doing, friends? And I may have said this before, but I met some really cool growers in a dry western state a couple years back. And when I asked how they felt about the water concerns, they almost uniformly told me that they felt if it got bad enough, the wealthy people in the state would fix it. More than one person said that to me. This, to me, is no plan. It's kind of the opposite. Exceedingly wealthy people, by their very existence of hoarding wealth, have proven they are not reliable saviors to the average person. No doubt they will solve it for themselves or get in their planes and fly to the water or fly the water to them, but they ain't pouring money into helping the rest of us. If they aren't doing that now, they aren't going to be doing that later. This report lays out a plan, an actual plan, and that's what we need. Policy and mitigation, not hope, not apathy, definitely not reliance on ultra wealthy people's goodwill, because we need to make a change. We need to execute that plan. Otherwise, we are not rebounding from this bankruptcy. We will just sink into the quicksand that we've created. So yeah, I guess those are my thoughts. Let us know yours. Also, if you want to dig in a little deeper, I'll share the recent episode of Stuff You Should Know on the Colorado River Compact, which is fascinating. And I mean, if you're out west, probably a little bit terrifying. Otherwise, that is Chardly, the only topic we have on the agenda for today. I'll see myself out. Be right back.
G'day nerds. Mid-autumn here. Pumpkins and corn going real well. I slashed down volunteer cover crop, and these 6 beds are getting prepped for my garlic to go in next week. 3 types of compost and cover crop mulch. Cheers.
Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit rimmel.com today to get growing. All right, back to the show.
All right, so in the first segment, we grew the Swiss chard out. In this segment, we will plant it. Now, I should say that Swiss chard likes what most crops like: fertile, well-draining soil. No surprises there. It's slightly thirstier in my experience than other leafy greens, but not as thirsty as, say, celery or celeriac, etc. Now, like I said, I like to plant Swiss chard around 3 weeks before the last frost date. You don't want to plant it so early that the plants experience a full-blown winter, because that will kill them just straight away. Or if they do survive, it will kind of convince them to bolt, because chard is a biennial, meaning that if it thinks it goes through a winter, it will bolt and go to flower, which is, not as fun. So If you do plant them before that last chance of frost, just cover them with row cover. There is no real trick here to planting, but the space will make a difference. And by that, I just mean the space between the plants. If you want baby leaves, then 4 to 6 inches apart with rows about 10 inches apart, so 10 to 15 centimeters apart and rows 25 centimeters apart, is fine for baby leaf. Baby leaf just meaning like basically like the size of your hand or something, give or take. For larger leaves, I go closer to 1 to 1.5 feet apart. That would be like 30 to 45 centimeters apart between plants with 2 rows on a 30-inch bed, 75 centimeters, or you could put 3 rows of chard in a 48-inch bed. You could maybe squeeze a fourth, but just if you're going for bigger leaves, you'd probably only want 3 on a 48-inch bed. That's like a 122 centimeter bed. If you do go with a 4th row or an extra row in any of that spacing, just give more space between the plants in the row. They will need some long-term fertility for sure. So some compost and or some alfalfa meal added before planting is not the worst idea. And some nice mulch if you've got it would be quite helpful because they do get thirsty. Growing is just growing. Keep it as weed-free as possible and watered so that the soil stays moist but not soppy. That's a word, I think. If you want a nice interplant, it is an option. Lettuce and or radishes can both work. I've also had good luck with beets and green onions planted in between our Swiss chard, but it's just nice to get one extra crop out of there if you can, but it's not necessary. The Swiss chard grows relatively quickly compared to, say, like tomatoes or peppers or whatever. One thing in our climate is that Swiss chard will grow well until like late June here in Kentucky, Zone 6B, at which point it gets what we call papery. This is the kind of point at which we stop harvesting it because it's just not very good. That oxalic acid gets a little bit more intense. It gets a little bit more bitter. If we have a nice mulch down and don't need the bed, we will cut it low and mulch it. And you can also use some shade cloth if you really want to get creative and extend that spring season a little bit more. But if we do mow it down, then we'll just let it chill until like August when it will bounce back even more prolifically. Generally, though, we need the bed, so we just like start over when we want fall chard. Anyway, for harvest, we bunch it in the fields generally and then sell it at the market piled high. It does wilt easily, like I said, so misting with a water bottle is important with fresh, clean water, of course. Sometimes we will also add it loose to bags, and I'll be a little bit more wasteful plastic-wise. You could use a recyclable plastic or whatever. That will keep it fresher for longer, and if you're going to put it in a fridge, it's got to be contained. It can't be open to the air because it will dehydrate, because fridges are giant dehydrators. And at market, we tend to bring it in a cooler too, just to keep it cold absolutely as long as we can. That will help so you can, switch out the wilted ones with the unwilted as well. Anyway, what did I miss? Let me know, Swiss chard lovers. Otherwise, we will chard a course for tomorrow. Nailed it. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, if you own a business and you're like, I'd love to sponsor the show, I like what they do, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com and also say thanks because she's done lots of hard work for us. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and also my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of April, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Jason Ruel, Earth Care Farmer Jane Murner, Derek Page, Meredith White of Granite Springs Farm, Grown Up Farm, Bob and Ann Patton of Hexhamshire Organics, Jared Kirst at Rivendell Farm, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, Chris, Larry Shepard, DP, Kat Brannigan, Little Row Farms, Hank Zecca, Jill Crosby, Madison, Alberto Diaz, Peter Broad, Sue Roland, Thomas Van Wart, Tyler Lloyd, Andrea Fronti, Toss Man, Cedric Reed, William Wiley Madro, Lynn Tompkins, Steve Hurlbut, Mark Hare, Hudson Carter, Jess Carr, Sonia Schwarzendruber, nailed that one, Adam Stickler, Robert Kilgore, Thomas, Chris Main, Richard Gould, and Norsgaard Farm. Shouts to all of you all for all of your support. Big ups to our pollinators. All right, so in today's story, we're following Pop-Tart, a lazy but skilled mouser of a feline who lives in Nebraska with a family of humans that are just a little too big for her to eat, it turns out. But anyway, Pop-Tart is living, her best life. She gets up whenever, she wants to. She chases mice when she sees them or feels like it. Gets fed and petted by the humans whenever she wants, of course. And then something happens. Her humans, they just change a lot, and it's annoying. And that is for tomorrow on The Pop-Tart Show. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.